It's kind of like we live in medieval times.
Everything is mid and fucking evil!
If you haven't noticed, it's gotten really medieval around here. Neo-medievalism is when our modern day culture is blending with medieval themes. This can be musically, in film, visually, but also socially and economically. And for the past 5-ish years, there's been a huge rise in neo-medievalism. An example of neo-medievalism that you definitely know of is Shrek. Like, that is a really great example of this. And it makes a lot of sense when you look at what kind of society we're living in. So today I'm going to talk about my absolute favorite example of this. It is the most horrifying, putrid, disgusting book I've ever read, and it's one of my favorite books of all time. And we're going to be talking about Ottessa Moshfegh's 2022 folk horror book, Lapvona. So for the last few years, the wealth gap has widened to like an almost comedic level, and that is one way you can say that our lives are a lot like the lives of medieval people. That's like a foundational way. But I don't think that is necessarily why the medieval aesthetic is coming around again. I think it is something more profound than that and a little bit more cultural than that. I think it is something more metaphorical and even deeper than a wealth gap and like feeling like we are peasants in a village. And we aren't just medieval in pop culture, like we are medieval as a society. On the internet, there is like a theme of the digital pillory. We have a relentless pursuit of who is the most moral and correct. And if somebody does something that we don't necessarily agree with, there is a mob justice mentality after them. And I don't really think that that is like unique to our generation, but it's worse now. Like, it's worse because we have the tools of the internet to have a mob justice. Now, in the Middle Ages, justice was a community event. It was very public driven, public hangings, the pillory, stocks, and witch hunts. Now, when somebody does something against the social taboo now, there is a social media pylon that is often devoid of nuance. And as a person, you are either judged as like pure and good and perfect or irrevocably tainted. And I think this mirrors the dogmatic religious nature of medieval people and the medieval time period. But my personal theory is like angry mob kind of behavior that we see now and we saw in the Middle Ages stems from lack of power, social instability, and lack of economic mobility, because what else are people going to do when they have no power to do anything else? And I also think the less we are able to emotionally regulate due to like really out of control outside forces, the less nuanced and like low cortisol behavior we exhibit, the more we act like a pitchforked mob with no direction. And I think like the loud, overstimulating AI ads we're getting are the same kind of nervous system punch that Middle Ages people got when there was poop being thrown from the 4th floor. We are also having a return to magical thinking, which happened in the medieval period. We are experiencing like an anti-intellectual surge that I don't even think is fathomable. And in terms of culture, we are shifting traditional. Like 31% of Gen Z men believe the wife should obey her husband. And there is like the rising tradwife movement that romanticizes a historically inaccurate, overly simplified version of the past. And it basically treats traditional gender roles as a band-aid, all-encompassing fix for the perils of modern life. Plus, there is a surge of old-timey medieval diseases because people do not get vaccinated and people do not pasteurize their milk. And people are not trusting fortified food. Now, Lapvona is a neo-medieval work. It is like a folk medieval horror tale, but it isn't religiously historical, like it doesn't exactly mirror medieval times. And I would say the type of neo-medievalism we are experiencing now is like a tongue-in-cheek Middle Ages reference, but it puts out this vibe of like, we know we're better than dirty Middle Ages people. This is just a fun costume. That is the vibe that this rise of Middle Ages cultural themes are giving off to me. But the funny thing is like we are not better than those people, and I think Lapvona is a response to that. Lapvona itself uses like biblical style parables to warn the reader. And to me, it reads as like a response to the modern person who thinks that they are above someone from the Middle Ages. It is written so plainly, like a lot of this author's work is. Like, it's written in very, very simple, plain language. And it is so easy to connect what the characters are feeling with things that we relate to. And the worst part is their lives are absolutely miserable. So this book is a major player in like the colloquial term weird girl books, but it is so heavy and dark that it gets overlooked just because of how gruesome and uncomfortable it is to read. But I think it gets overlooked because it's in this like girl books genre, the ones with the Renaissance paintings as covers. And the cornerstone of Lapvona is that it is so deeply medieval yet so deeply modern. It is showing you how clearly human behavior never really changes. And it is very nihilistic and judgmental about that. So the basic plot of this book is very hard to describe because at its core, it's like a bunch of parables combined together under one roof, because it is essentially a bunch of metaphorical horror stories. And you get a lot of different points of view from different characters. As in like an omniscient person, you're seeing all these characters, what's going on in their heads and what's going on in their lives. And some of the stories are about cannibalism, some are about murder, some are about chaining somebody up in your basement, but essentially it is about people living in the town of Lapvona. So to really dig into like the meat of what some of this book is trying to say, I want to go over the main parables and the main characters and what they symbolize and what they are trying to warn against. Now, what happens to these characters is very graphic and very gross, and I'm also obviously going to spoil the book, so if you would like to read the book, or if you don't want to hear about that, obviously see the next one. Peace. So Lapvona itself is a very important character because it is almost like a magical land, much like a Middle Ages story usually is. Like if you look at Middle Ages paintings, like there's a lot of magical shit going on that's metaphorical for things in real life. Lapvona is said to have good dirt, and that's like constantly repeated. There are two basic areas of Lapvona. There is the village where the peasants live, the workers live, and then there is a castle on the manor or whatever where the King William lives. He lives up there with his son, his wife, and his employees. And down in the village, people are very uneducated, very poor, very superstitious, and very deeply religious. They basically have all of their culture from the church that happens weekly that you basically have to go to. But the priest is obviously like a sham. In this book, it is so deeply nihilistic towards religion. Like, the priest does not know what he's talking about. So the manor is a place of ridiculous excess and gluttony. It literally and figuratively drains the life out of the village below because the king siphons off water for his manor before it gets to the village. So the villagers are like constantly suffering and they're very poor. The town is also often raided by bandits that are actually sent by the king either to strike fear and obedience into the villagers or just to actually steal money because he's behind on taxes. Now, Merrick is sort of our main character. He is where you begin your story and where you end your story. He's a young boy, around 13. He has severe birth defects because his mom had him with her brother. So you can put two and two together about that. He has a twisted spine, a protruding rib cage, bright red hair, freckles, bowed legs, and a limp left arm. His head is misshapen. He just has a lot of outward issues. Now, obviously his life is hard because of this, but he likes it that way. Christianity itself comes with a lot of self-denial and martyrdom. And this type of Christianity is very big in Lapvona. So many saints are revered because they pluck out their own eyes or sit on a pillar for 30 years. But Merrick really resonates with this kind of suffering and masochism, basically. He believes suffering is a gift from God, and he loves to be beaten and he loves to be in pain because he feels it makes him pure and he becomes holier. And this is very, very easy for Merrick when he lives in a poor situation with his father Jude on their lamb farm. It's very easy to suffer when you're poor and your dad is beating you, like it's easy. But one day on a walk with the king's son, Jacob, Merrick literally pushes him off a cliff. Like, I think he throws a rock, I don't totally remember, but he does something that makes this king's son fall off the cliff to his death. It's this really grotesque scene where Jacob has a broken arm or leg on the cliffside, and his eyes coming out. It's really gross, really graphic, and Jacob bleeds to death at the bottom of this cliff because of Merrick. And we're gonna get to that, why he does that and how that doesn't really align with being a good Christian. But Merrick is taken by the King Lord William as a replacement son when this happens. And that seems really weird until I talk about the king later. But when that happens, Merrick has to abandon his piety for gluttony, luxury, and excess in the manor with the king. And his martyring becomes very hard to do. Like, you can't be masochistic when you are the king's son. So when Merrick's physical needs are met and he doesn't have to be beaten anymore and he can eat whatever he wants, he has a servant, he starts to project this darkness and insecurity more outwards. And his needs being met and him living a life of luxury does not fix his need to suffer. And it just makes him extremely evil. So what Merrick's story is essentially telling the reader is seeking suffering will only beget more suffering. It is almost similar to Saint Maud, where her delusional suffering eventually leads her to have a complete breakdown. Merrick's story is so painful to listen to because his inner monologue is constantly like, how can I be hurt? He is constantly having an inner monologue of masochism, and he loves to be hurt and to suffer. But his existence is basically a paradox because he abuses himself in the pursuit of heaven, but when he gets to a sort of heaven on earth, he does not know how to feel pleasure. And it turns him into something like delusional and scary and someone who's not connected with reality at all. Because he doesn't know how to be himself without being beaten and in pain, he eventually has to recreate that pain by murdering a baby. Like, he throws his baby brother off a cliff. Just like he threw Jacob off a cliff. He cannot accept a reality where he is just a king's son or a boy. He has to be a martyr. He has to be this grandiose idea of a martyr. Now, Jude is Merrick's abusive father. He is deeply religious as well, but he's very hypocritical and he's not really into masochism, like, at all, but he uses religion to justify horrible things that he does. Jude is the opposite of Merrick physically. He is like very buff, strong, handsome, and he looks nothing like Merrick. And obviously it's not his real father. Jude never puts two and two together because he is crazy. Now, what is so scary about Jude is he completely makes up his own reality in a way that makes him able to do whatever he wants. He is so abusive and psychotic that he lies to himself and pretends that Merrick's mother died during childbirth when she really just ran away from him. Now, Merrick's mother is a mute woman named Agata, and Jude found her running away from somewhere in the night, one night, and he found her and he said, oh, that's my woman. That's God gave that woman to me. So he ties her up, abuses her, horrible essay, bad. And he kept her shackled in the dark, treating her basically like a captured animal. But he doesn't remember it that way. He does deep down, but overall, he's quite good at convincing himself that he's a very holy man. Now, on the day that Merrick kills the king's son, he comes and gets his father Jude, kind of expecting a beating, like he wants a beating. But Jude carries the dead son up to the castle to give to the king. Jude is expecting Merrick to be executed, but what happens is the king proposes that they just swap sons because William the king is extremely detached from reality as well, and we're gonna get to him, but Jude is left without a son. And he's a bit relieved by this because Merrick is annoying to him. And there's this vibe that oh, if Merrick's gone, I will be successful, I'll be happy. But that obviously doesn't happen at all. There is a catastrophic drought in the village while Merrick is with the king and Jude is alone with his lambs. And what happens is all the crops die, the sun is extremely hot, and there's no water. Unbeknownst to the peasants, William has literally siphoned all the water to his castle, so that's why there's no water. But Jude and everyone else is starving, and Jude resorts to cannibalism, eating an old man named Kilm. It is a truly horrible and disgusting scene of him cooking and eating this guy. It is truly gross. And Jude has like a habit for judging everybody else for their earthly desires. Like he judges everyone very harshly. But what happens is he ends up doing whatever he's judging others for in the very extreme, in a like even more perverse and twisted way. During the drought, he was actually trying to save Kilm from getting eaten by the other villagers. So he takes him away, and then Jude ends up eating Kilm, and he ends up going very crazy. And the same thing happens with his like extreme religious piety, and he SAs Agata viciously and beats the hell out of Merrick, but he's like judging people for eating his lambs because they're so cute and precious. Now during the drought, Jude actually runs into Agata, who he has been pretending died this whole time. And during this drought, Agata has fled the nunnery that she's been at for all these years, and she's just wandering the woods and unfortunately runs into Jude again. Jude SAs her again, and he kind of believes like he's having a hallucination due to the drought and to the dehydration and like the starvation, but he SAs her, and that baby ends up being the baby that Merrick throws off the cliff later. And there's so many things that happen in between this. It's like too much to get into, but that's where the story goes. Now, what's important is Jude, in his worldview, thinks that he's a noble man, but that is so far from reality. It is like almost comedic, but because he won't admit he's a predator, his worldview is just a bunch of attempts to hide this from himself. And at the end of the novel, Jude is basically unrecognizable physically because of starvation and trauma. And I think that is his entire character, is he's unrecognizable. He doesn't even have a grasp on reality itself. He doesn't have a grasp on his own self. And he's using religion as a way to justify whatever he does. So Agata is an interesting character because we don't actually get to be inside of her head that much, if at all. And her real story is she was SA'd presumably by her brother. She runs to Lapvona for help, and then Jude kidnaps her. And Jude thinks that Merrick is his son when he's not. But Agata in Lapvona is essentially a metaphor for abusive misogyny and the patriarchy in the Middle Ages. She is a mute woman taken from at every single turn. Like she's a reflection of a woman who has no protection. She's never saved from anything that is done to her in the entire book or that anybody wants to do to her. She isn't saved from Jude. She isn't saved from having Merrick. She isn't saved from having to be a nun, or isn't saved from being William's like bride thing in his castle. Like he makes her stay there as entertainment. And that's kind of the point of her character. It is like the grotesque and horrifying reality of what it would be to be a woman with no protection, who anyone can do what they want to you. And the end of her life is her like basically mummified, sucked completely dry after having her son in bed dead. Like that's the end of her life. And it's like she's been sucked for everything that she has. And Lapvona is, in theory on paper, very, very religious. So she should have been safe in that village, but she was not. But because the villagers in Lapvona outsource their moral compass to random things that they say are religion, it is entirely meaningless and there is no compass. They do whatever they want with Agata. And even Merrick, her son, sees her as something that he is owed and not as a person whatsoever. And the village witch, medicine woman, Ina, literally sucks the life out of her dry until there's nothing left at the end of the book, and Ina steals her youth. She is the disturbing consequence of this kind of society. And we're going to talk about Ina later. She's very, very important. So in Buddhism, there's this idea of the hungry ghost, and it's like a being who is driven by intense emotional needs in an animalistic way. And that's basically William. Like, he's driven by the need to be entertained in every way you could possibly be entertained. He's extremely frail and withered, but he eats grotesquely and in enormous amounts. He has a never-ending appetite for food and drink and distraction, and he's essentially a black hole that his servants are constantly trying to fill. And his morals and worldview are just changing from one second to another based on what's the most entertaining to him. He is basically chaos. Like, he's never going to be all bad. Like, him taking Merrick in was weird and like probably the good thing to do, but that's the point of William. He's complete chaos. But chaos is even scarier than a predictable evil. William is so strange and so weirdly abusive to his servants. Like, he makes his servant Lisbeth eat a grape that Merrick put in his butt, which is really, really gross. It's like written really gross. And William's castle is where we see the theme of religion really, really shatter, because he's supposed to be the leader of Lapvona. The people trust him and look up to him, and he could not care less about religion in a way that matters. William's castle should be essentially the benchmark for morality based on the way the Lapvonians think, and it is just a hollow facade of debauchery and chaos. Now, William's little own made hell is that he views himself as the director of a play that everybody is putting on for him, and he's like a god and everyone else is a toy. But the issue with doing that is that nothing seems real to you anymore. So when nothing matters and your son gets thrown off a cliff, you do not care. And that is a miserable, hellish existence to live in. And this obviously drives him completely insane, and he ends up dead at the end of the book. Now, Ina is arguably the most important character in this book because she's different from everyone else. So Ina is a witch who has somehow lived over 100 years. She is where we can gain the most clarity on this really confusing and weird story. Lapvona, as a novel, in my opinion, is a discussion on how the perception of the world depends on the perception you have of yourself. And the way you see the world is created by what you believe the world will give you. But the problem is, when you're not willing to accept the reality of yourself and your traits, good and bad, your worldview becomes distorted, perverse, twisted, full of self-made hell and suffering. The characters in this book, swallowing kind of the rock of what is bad about yourself, is kind of the sacrificial lamb you need to offer up to gain any kind of power, or real escape from this hell in this novel. The characters in Lapvona don't live in the same universe. They live in the one that they've created themselves. And it's mostly based on their own delusions. Religion, for example, is just like a cheap band-aid that people in Lapvona use to justify a number of crazy shit that they do. Now, this is a trait that humans have not outgrown whatsoever. And the ego that we have outgrown, these sort of self-made blinders, makes it so history can and will repeat until the end of time. The characters of this book have entirely different realities, all hellish, all shaped by their own delusions and view of themselves. And what the author, I think, is trying to say is that these self-made hells are generational and never-ending. But when you're in the position of God looking down, it is so clear what the issue is, but it's so hard when you're actually on the ground. Like, the author lets you into so many characters' minds that you can very clearly see the issues. But Ina is really, really important because she knows this, and she's almost as omniscient as the reader. She has a deep, deep self-awareness, so she knows everything that happens in Lapvona, and she knows all the goings on. And she can basically float between realities and create magic. She is a spin on the trope of like the wise old woman, the crone, the witch, but she is a little bit different because the idea isn't that she's good or that she's moral. The idea is that she is deeply self-aware. Her story is that she was the lone survivor of a plague that killed her entire family, and this disease took out her eyesight, so she's been blind her whole life. She literally had to awaken blind to the smell of all the corpses of her family members, and she was just alone as a girl. The villagers who survived in Lapvona were so scared of her, and they thought that she was like evil or magic or whatever for surviving. But she almost went through a sort of ego death kind of thing with this, because she realized what she needed to do for survival, and it was become useful to the villagers. And because she's useful, she lives essentially undisturbed for her whole life. Now, when you contrast this with Merrick, when Merrick's whole life changed, he literally imploded and started wanting to kill babies. So instead, Ina gained an awareness and gained a sense of survival. But even though she's very, very self-aware and very good at surviving and very good at reading people, she's still a really bad person. Like, everyone in this book's a bad person. She provides like a motherly comfort by nursing everyone in town pretty much, but it's perverse and it's parasitic and gross the way she does it. It's like that's not normal. But she's entirely aware of this and just accepts that. Like, she knows and accepts that she is parasitic. And the big difference with Ina is that she's in control in a way that nobody else is. She's gross, but it works for her. Like she takes the eyes from this horse and uses them to see, and she can just do that. But I think the metaphorical meaning of her having horse eyes when she wants them, because she takes them in and out of her sockets, is that she sees things from the clear vision of an animal or a beast. She knows that Lapvona is a farce. She knows the king is a farce, the priest is a farce, but she rejects these human delusions of like God or society, and instead chooses animalistic survival. And she sees the world as it truly is. I think Lapvona is almost like a comedic book that scoffs at our collective self-created misery that is so clear in the book that we cannot see day to day. But it's so funny how, as people, we are exactly the same. And thinking we've changed from people in the Middle Ages is a trick of our own egos. Now, my personal theory is that we are drawn to neo-medievalism because we are jealous of their lives because they were simpler. I feel like we see people from the past and think that they had an understanding of the world that wasn't so surveilled and it wasn't so complicated. And there's almost this like textural, grounded fairy tale aesthetic of magic and mystery that is all but gone now. Like, they did not have whatever food they wanted, but they had like gritty, romantical connections to people and the earth. And they seemed open to the spiritual world in like a dark and also whimsical way. But I don't think any of those things are actually accurate. I think that we are inventing ideas of Middle Ages people and romanticizing it. Because there's this interesting thing where like we put ourselves above these kind of people because they're really old, at the same time that we invent and romanticize their lives and use parts of their lives for our own entertainment now. But what I think Otessa is trying to say is that neither of these is the right way to look at history or to look at their lives. Because people in the Middle Ages were not as grounded or idealistic as we thought that they were. They literally thought their lords were basically gods. And when we have all the spoils of their collective labor throughout history, what is our God? So I'm sorry if I didn't get to your favorite part of the book. There is so much symbolism and like plot in this book, and it's not even that long. It's just extremely packed with stuff that I probably could make a 7-hour video essay on. But thank you so much for watching if you watched till the end, and I hope you have a really good night. Peace.